Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this hearing of the House Committee on Higher Education and Technology. Always, well, especially happy to see members of the public join us in this Capitol hearing room. It is Wednesday, March 16th, 2 p.m., and we are meeting in Capitol Conference Room 309. In case you are not aware, we have amended the agenda to delete the last two bills on the original agenda because they have been re-referred to different committees other than higher ed. So first up on today's agenda, we have Senate Bill 832 relating to victim counselor privilege and expanding the privilege to advocates, confidential advocates. So first up, we have from the Jennifer Rose.
Good afternoon, Chair Takayama, Vice Chair Clark. Thank you for the opportunity to appear via virtual presentation. I am representing the Vice President of Administration, Jan Govea, for today's hearing, and we are in strong support of this bill. I think it's a bill from last session, and I might have appeared before you, Chair Takayama, on this bill in the past. The university would obviously appreciate that advocates on our campuses are treated in the same way as community advocates, as they essentially serve the same functions. This bill would allow us to fully effectuate the spirit and the intent of Act 208, Session Law 2016, ensuring a higher level of confidentiality of communications with victims on campus for our campus advocates. We appreciate the opportunity to testify, and I'll be available for questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we have from the Sex Abuse Treatment Center of Hawaii, Lynn Costales-Matsuoka.
Aloha, Chair, members of the committee. Stephanie Sakamoto on behalf of the Sex Abuse Treatment Center will stand in our testimony in support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have written testimony from Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, AAUW of Hawaii, the State Judiciary, Every Voice Coalition Hawaii, and 6 individuals, all of them in support. In fact, every testifier is in support with the exception of the judiciary, which offers comments. So anyone else wishing to testify on Senate Bill 832? Seeing none, members, do we have any questions? Yes, Representative.
For UH?
For Jen Rose. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay. I know that UH just completed its most recent climate survey regarding sexual misconduct on campus. Can you explain some of the trends that you folks had found? Are things getting better or worse? And are some of the student groups being or expressing greater vulnerability than others?
Thank you, Rep. Capella. I think our climate survey it's been available for the legislature as of our 2021 year-end report for Act 222. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to review it, and I really appreciate the question. I think just as a general overview, there are places where I think we have been able to move the needle in terms of students knowing where to go for support, understanding the differences between confidential and non-confidential resources, and feeling that their privacy has been respected when they do come forward to speak with a first responder or an advocate. As far as the actual trends, there has been a downturn of the prevalence in all of the 5 categories that we had surveyed for, which is sexual harassment, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and 2 forms of sexual violence, penetration, rape, and non-consensual sexual contact. But that could have been because of COVID, and we don't know statistically for sure. The trauma impacts are still present in a consistent way as they were 2 years ago, which means that the student victims who self-identified as experiencing any forms of those 5 types of gender violence had also self-described as experiencing some form of a negative consequence, whether it be physical or emotional, academic. So I think the need for confidential resources, including advocates and mental health support, is still there. And we appreciate the support that you've provided on this matter and making sure that students' voices are heard. I think the vulnerability is still there for particular groups, LGBTQ plus students. There is some vulnerability for students who are graduate students who experience sexual harassment at the hands of an employee of the university. So that data has not changed too much despite the vulnerability trends, despite the fact that the prevalence has gone down during this last year of surveying the students. And it was during the height of COVID. So it would have been, the survey went out last year in January and went through March. So it did actually occur during the time when there were not a lot of students on campus.
Thank you so much. Chair, if I may, any more questions?
Yeah, sure. Follow-up question.
Generous, I thank you so much for all of your efforts, but I have one more question. And since you brought up grad students, there was a statistic that was brought up during the grad student union hearing, where it was said that 50% of all transgender individuals at UH had felt or been sexually harassed on campus. Has UH done any outreach, or are you folks doing any outreach to reach into that population of very vulnerable students and grad students?
Yeah, I think, I heard some of the statistics that were mentioned at that hearing, but I didn't actually have a chance to go and review the testimony, and I will do that. I appreciate that. I think you were the second person that mentioned not that specific stat, but that there were some statistics on sexual harassment that were presented by the Grad Students Union. So I actually do want to follow up with them. You might be aware that we have a LGBTQ plus commission, and we have commissioners on each of the campuses. So I do know that I don't have a very, very recent update, but I do know that the commission has been working hard. I just spoke with one of the Title IX coordinators today when we did a community presentation. And there is curricula that has already been developed specifically for transphobia. We are also trying to do more outreach through targeted through our advocacy program at the system level. So currently we have 2 advocates. We're hoping to hire a third. One of our advocates, Jojo Miller, is specifically expressed interest as being identified as part of that community to do specific training, has done a couple of pilot trainings already for a small group. So we're hoping that maybe we can work with folks at your office and those folks in the community and student groups to work with the LGBTQ plus commission to try to institutionalize that training, because I think it is really critical that we're not just looking at the data academically and actually thinking about targeted training for vulnerable populations. We're also, as a final thing, I'm glad that you mentioned this, we are looking at new curricula through the online training that we do that will be more comprehensive on issues of LGBTQ plus vulnerability. So we haven't decided about a vendor yet. We are actually looking at considering not continuing with the same vendor that we have currently. And so we're vetting various curricula through our super stakeholders internally at the university, and we'll make sure that students have a chance to pilot the curricula too, and maybe ask the Grad Student Union to take a look at it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, General. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Representative Belatti.
I guess this is for Ms. Rose. Can you describe what is the reasoning behind having the term semi-absolute privilege in the bill?
I think that was a clarification that was made on the Senate side. As far as I understand, I'm not an expert on privilege per se, but I think there are some states that do have an absolute privilege that is tied to a whole stream of those protected kinds of relationships like attorney, client, and victim counselor. But for the most part, I think most states don't have an absolute privilege because there are exceptions like mandatory reporting for child abuse. So that may be the reason why they clarified it as a semi-absolute privilege. And that's my best understanding of it. And I know I looked at I thought this question might come up, Representative Bellotti, and so I looked at to see how Hawaii was characterized, and there are some like legal journals that say that Hawaii is semi-absolute privilege state, and there were a few older ones that said that it was an absolute privilege state. So it was a little bit confusing, but I would defer to the consistency of the HRS and the rules of evidence in our state, and defer to all of you and the LRB for that clarification. But it wasn't particularly a recommendation that the university made, but I do think that that probably is the correct clarification, given that there really isn't any absolute privilege that I can think of. I think it's the way that it gets named and defined within each state.
Okay, well, I think as this moves forward, someone should look at this, because if this actually weakens the privilege, because we want to open it up to the university, I don't know that this is the best language. So I'm just, you know,
I
the
agree.
judiciary raises some very good questions. Is there anyone from the judiciary here?
No.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Rose. Thank you, Chair.
And so noted, I will also follow up. Thank you.
If I could, sorry to go out of order, but if I could follow up on the Representative Bellotti's line of questioning.
Yeah.
The bill also makes reference to the fact that among the mandatory reporting requirements is if an employee of the UH is accused of some form of sexual harassment, that there is a mandatory reporting requirement that in other words, the victim's privilege is semi-absolute because the victim cannot prevent that person from disclosing confidential information. So that may be what I think the testimony was in reference to. Does that make sense to you, Ms. Rose?
I think so, but it may not be tied to it. I think that the reference that you're making is to the Title VII, requirement that if an institution, employer they have control over their employee, if they're noticed of any potential discrimination, that they have a responsibility to act. But the privilege would be something that would protect communications or from being subpoenaed and having to testify in court. But it could be what the Senate was also considering, taking everything into consideration. And I apologize, I haven't had a chance to look at the judiciary comments. And so I do want to echo what Representative Al-Bellotti mentioned, that there's no way that we would ever want to weaken the privilege that already exists for community advocates. So I would actually want that clarification as well in terms of absolute versus semi-absolute.
Yeah. Just to note that this is the first of 3 House committees to which it's being referred. So it has yet to go before the House Judiciary Committee.
Yeah.
Members, any other questions?
Sure.
Yeah, Representative Gannett.
Ms. Rose.
Go ahead, proceed.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. Sorry, I'm looking to the left. I'm watching you on TV. We're still learning this hybrid system. To your knowledge, has a victim or a prospective victim ever been compelled to testify in a criminal trial against either themselves or another person in which this privilege would need to be invoked?
I haven't had any personal experience in my professional capacity at the university, even when I was working directly with survivors. But I am aware of cases in which the information was attempted to be compelled, not from anyone that I work with specifically at the university, but we do know of cases that were being handled by community advocates in which there had been attempts to get that privileged information.
So would you say that one of the functions of this bill would to allow for further trust between a victim and a counselor so that services might be provided?
I think that is a huge thing, especially when the victims are trying to get support post-COVID. I think, and there has been a challenge of having to do that, in remote spaces, trying to build that trust. When you have to do a whole panoply of all of the exceptions to why you can't maintain confidence, it is really difficult to build that trust in the beginning. So to say that there's also, I think, Rep. Garnet, and I'm glad you brought this up, there is the idea that the campus advocates are treated in the same way professionally as community advocates is actually a huge thing. I think so victims have options. They can choose a community advocate or they can choose a campus advocate or work with both, but to know that they're going to be able to provide that same level of confidentiality as a community advocate, I think is a huge way at building trust in the very beginning when you don't have a lot of time to do that in a crisis situation. So I actually appreciate that.
So were we to pass this, you could include this confidentiality and its protections in intake. Would you say that?
Yes. So
Okay.
that could be then part of the new script in ensuring and talking about the difference between, privacy, confidentiality, and privilege, and what an advocate can maintain could then be included in part of the best practice protocols.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. I think we have discussed this at length, and let's move on if there are no other questions. Next bill, we have Senate Bill 2567 relating to a requirement for the Department of Homelands to digitize its records for beneficiaries access. And let's see, we have Department of Homelands, Mr. Ayla.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Takayama, Vice Chair Clark, and members of the committee. We offer comments on this bill. We are in the process of digitizing some of our documents at the moment, and we would not be opposed to additional digitization as long as the resources are made available and that it doesn't affect the priorities identified in the governor's budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, we have written comments from the Department of Budget and Finance and testimony and support from Claire Kamalu Carroll. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on Senate Bill 2567? If not, members, questions?
I have a quick question.
Representative Bellotti.
This is for Chair. Just if you had to say 100% would be done, where are you guys in the process of digitizing at this point, since it started in June 2013?
I would say we are this is just a rough estimate. I think we are close to about 90%, but there are a lot more documents because some of these records go back a long time. So 90%, I think, complete right now, but we're not done.
Are beneficiaries able to access these then on the neighbor islands? Or there's still no public?
Okay, so beneficiaries are able to access their position on the wait list, which we update annually. Many of the documents are considered private, and so they're not available to anyone in the general public to view.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? If not, I have a follow-up question for Mr. Ayla. The bill has a blank amount in terms of appropriations for you to complete your task and improve the system. If you had a suggested amount to fill in as an appropriation, what would that be?
Chair, I'm not prepared to give you an amount right now. I could consult with staff and provide you with much better information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Subsequent to this conversation.
Okay, you all, well, yeah, all right, that's fine. And this bill, we're only the first committee, so if you can prepare that information for subsequent committees, I think that'd be appreciated. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, let's move on to the next bill, which is Senate Bill 2076. And it's relating to broadband infrastructure. And let's see. First up, we have Department of Health.
Good afternoon, Chair Takayama, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lauren Kim, Policy and Planning Officer for the Department of Health, testifying on behalf of Dr. Char. I am here to express our strong support for this measure. DBET's leadership and cooperation with executive agencies in the private sector has been excellent, and we hope to continue the community effort to bring broadband to as many of our residents as possible. Thank you, and I'll be on standby for questions.
Thank you. And I hope things are nice in Pacific Palisades. He's a constituent.
District 43 represent.
Let's see, we have Bert Lum, Department of Business and Economic Development.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bert Lum. I'm the Broadband Strategy Officer here in DBED, and I'm here representing Director Mike McCartney. And of course, we stand by our testimony in support of SB 2076, and am available for questions. And I live in Pro City as well, Palisades.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's right, you are. In fact, you live across the street, as I recall, from each other. So anyway, let's see, we have testimony from several other organizations, including the Disability and Communications Access Board, State Council on Developmental Disabilities, Hawaii Primary Care Association, Common Cause, Hawaii State Council on Mental Health, Maui Chamber, Hawaii Broadband Hui, and also comments from Craig Hirai, Department of BNF, and an individual, Ryan Ozawa. Anyone else I missed who's interested in testifying on Senate Bill 2076? Seeing none, members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Next up, we have Senate Bill 2292 relating to privacy, modernizing the definition of personal information for purposes of notifying affected persons of data and security breaches. Let's see, first up, we have Office of Enterprise Technology Services.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Vince Huang, Chief Information Security Officer from the Office of Enterprise Technology Services. On behalf of Doug Murdoch, our CIO, we stand on our written testimony in support and am available for questions. Thank you.
Hawaii Insurers Council, Allison Uyoka.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Allison Uyoka for Hawaii Insurers Council. We'll stand on our testimony with comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Hawaii Credit Union League, Stephanie Sakamoto.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Stephanie Sakamoto on behalf of the Hawaii Credit Union League. We'll stand on our testimony in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, we have DCCA, Office of Consumer Protection.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Levins from the Office of Consumer Protection. You know, Hawaii law really needs to be modernized with respect to privacy. The current law really dates back almost 16 years or more right now. And the original version of this bill was a well thought out vehicle that was a product of a privacy task force that I was a member of. Unfortunately, certain provisions were amended and really weakened the concept behind privacy. And I'll be specific. For instance, medical history is now not considered to be personal information under this bill. So HIPAA covers a lot of information regarding medical information, but it only covers what's called covered entities. And like your employer is not a covered entity generally, and a lot of other companies are not subject to HIPAA. So for instance, if you are looking for your ancestry and you provide your DNA to a company and there's a security breach, they have no obligation under Hawaii law to let us know. This law would correct that situation. Similarly, if your employer is records are hacked and your medical information that your employer possesses is compromised, under current law and under the current version of this bill, there's not an obligation, a legal obligation for your company to let you know that that information has been compromised. Similarly, everybody is wearing these smart watches now and other medical devices. If that information is compromised, unless the company is subject to HIPAA, which many of these companies are not, there's again no obligation to let you know. So we really think the this medical history really needs to be reinserted back into the bill. The other part that we're concerned about is the Social Security information. The original version of the bill mandated that if there were 4 or more digits of your Social Security number that were compromised, the company had to let you know, and that constituted personal information. And the reason for 4 is a lot of companies, will excise the other information, other numbers, but they'll retain the last 4 numbers. But as you know, until maybe 10 years ago, everybody in Hawaii, for the first 3 digits, would either have 575 or 576. It's no longer the case, but older generations had their Social Security numbers started with 575 and 576. And bad guys know this, right? And then you have the last 4 digits that have been compromised. So all they have to do is guess the middle 2.
Mr. Levins, I'm going to ask you to summarize.
Yeah, anyway, that we also think that the last 4 digits should be reinserted into the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple in-person testifiers, Blake Oshiro, CTIA.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Blake Oshiro on behalf of CTIA. We are the Wireless Association, so we're the trade association for all of the wireless carriers, as well as some of their affiliated businesses. We respectfully oppose this legislation. We've submitted our written testimony. Very briefly, I will summarize. Our concern is that this is making Hawaii somewhat not able to be operated the same as other states. It's somewhat of an outlier. And so we are concerned that when it comes to things like cell phone and mobile phone data and information, especially with people being able to travel to multiple states, it really is important that we have consistency through our data breach laws. And so for that reason, we are opposing this legislation. I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Kelly McCanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Kelly McCandless, and like Director Levins, I was a member of the task force, the 21st Century Privacy Law Task Force that helped craft this bill. And I'd like to cover 2 points. First of all, I know there are a number of items that are in opposition in the testimony to this bill. If you look at who is testifying, and again, in opposition to this bill, it's fairly clear. If you look back, for instance, when seatbelts and airbags were added to automotives, the car company said that it would price cars so that no one could afford a car. We know that didn't happen. But the key is that 50 states do have 50 different data breach laws. And the bottom line is most companies then operate to a commonality. And companies could continue to do that. Almost every data item in here was taken from some other law in some other state. I read all 50 state data breach notification laws while we were crafting this bill. The only item that is different in this bill than most other states is the Social Security number. And I'd like to continue where Director Levins left off. Because we're a small state and because those social security numbers were geographically assigned for so many years. As he said, the first 3 digits for almost everybody who got their social security number in the state before 2011 is already known. So only 2 digits really protect a social security number if the last 4 numbers are breached. For adolescents, for instance, it's not all 100 numbers in those 2 digits. Only 11 combinations were used during the years 2004 to 2011. So it's not like even the 2 digits are fully random. They're not. And so Hawaii is the only state in the union that had only 2 sets of the first 3 digits used for most adults. And how would these hackers find, or anybody bad actor find out that you were raised locally and therefore have 575 or 576? Well, the innocuous question, what high school did you go to, is enough to tell somebody that you were raised in the state. And that's enough to tell them that if you're an adult, you have 575 or 576. So I would like to stand on my written testimony. For any other points, I would like to refer to Director Levin's testimony about medical information, which is also important. And I'm available for any further questions from the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Let's see, we have testifier from the State Privacy and Security Coalition, Andrew Kingman.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Proceed.
How are you? Good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Andy Kingman. I represent the State Privacy and Security Coalition. I also am an attorney in DLA Piper Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practice Group. So I've worked on maybe 20 or 30 breaches working on the state notification piece of that. And our concerns are really around 2 themes. The first is clarity, and the second is alignment. When we're talking about state breach notification laws, the things that we want to make sure of are that consumers are getting clear notifications when their identities are at risk. We want to make sure that those communications accurately represent a threat so that they're not receiving notices when their identities or there's no risk of fraud. The second piece is alignment. And when we are dealing with state data breach laws, being aligned with other states, what it means in practice is that the state residents are notified more efficiently than states with outlier data elements, or in this case, the identifier category, which is not found in any other state laws. So our amendments are really geared towards increasing the clarity and increasing the alignment with other state laws, making sure that things like financial account numbers are combined with the access code, which is how it's done in the vast majority of states. To the concerns around Social Security numbers, we understand that. We're not opposing that. We think that makes sense in Hawaii's case. And then would also ask that our testimony focus on encryption, which again goes to that concern of consumers' data being actually at risk. In other words, if somebody acquires encrypted information without the key, it's not a good event to trigger a notification to a consumer, because the consumer will understand that their information is at risk when really it's not. So we've submitted written testimony to that effect. We've also noted a possible solution to get at the issue that maybe the identifier category was getting at. So would rest on our testimony and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Let's see, we have an individual, Jenna Matilla on Zoom.
Aloha Chair Takayama, Vice Chair Clark, and members of the committee. Jenna Matilla here on behalf of the Consumer Data Industry Association, and we will stand on our testimony in opposition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have written testimony from a number of organizations. Hawaii Pacific Health in support, Hawaiian Electric in support, Verizon offering comments, Hawaii Financial Services Association offering comments. RELX, relax, I guess, in opposition. Hawaii Association of Health Plans offering comments, and Hawaii Bankers Association offering comments. Now, is there anyone I missed who wishes to testify on House Senate Bill 2292? Seeing none, members, questions? Okay, let's move on to the final bill on the agenda, Senate Bill 3038, and it is relating to the Information Privacy and Security Council, and we have Office of Enterprise Technology Services.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. This is Vince Huang again. We stand on our written testimony and support and are available for questions.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on Senate Bill 3038? Members, any questions? Seeing none, let's. Okay, let's follow up on decision making. And first up, we have Senate Bill 832, Victim Counselor Privilege. Recommendation will be to add an effective date of July 2050 to the bill, and also add report language suggesting that the Committee on Judiciary consider comments from the state judiciary raised regarding the use of the term semi-absolute when defining a victim's privilege. Members, any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, Vice Chair, please take the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Now voting on bill number SB 832, SD1. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Bellotti.
Aye.
Representative Costales. Aye. Representative Ganadin.
Aye.
Representative Gates.
Aye.
Representative Hashimoto.
Aye.
Representative Capella.
Aye.
Representative Ono. Excused. Representative Quinlan. Representative Woodson.
Aye.
Representative Yamani.
Aye.
Representative Okimoto. Aye. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Senate Bill 2567 relating to Department of Hawaii and Homelands. Recommendation will be to move this out as is. Oh, as is. Any questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair, for the vote.
Now voting on bill number SB 2567. SD1, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments, noting the absence of, let's see, everyone's here? Looks like everyone's here. Thank you. Noting the presence of all members. Are there any members voting no? Any members voting with reservations? With all members voting aye, Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next bill is Senate Bill 2076 relating to broadband service infrastructure. This is a measure that we heard in somewhat related form earlier this session. And the bill that was adopted by the House, including this committee, was a bit broader than this bill before us in that it created a broadband authority to provide infrastructure follow-up and also expend the several $100 million in federal funds for broadband. So my recommendation will be to replace the contents of this bill with the contents of House Bill 2397, House Draft 3, and move it forward from here. Members, any questions, comments?
Chair, just have a comment. Thank you, Chair, for moving this along. And I believe that these changes are germane to the conversation that we're having about broadband just generally. So I really appreciate you moving House position into this bill, which also incorporates the Digital Office of Equity language as well. So thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments? If not, Vice Chair.
Now voting on Bill SB 2076 SD2. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Noting the presence of all members, are there any members voting no? Any members voting with reservations? With all members voting aye, Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. This next bill is Senate Bill 2292 relating to privacy. And I know a number of concerns have been raised by some of the service providers. Going to move this forward. There are two more committees yet to consider this bill. I'd like to move it forward with a couple of changes in section 2, page 2, section 2, relating to identifier on line 19, where it now says a phone number. Let's make it a mobile phone number. And where it says an email address, I'd like to add an email address specific to the individual, period. And on the next page, in reference to an individual security number, acknowledging the testimony from Office of Consumer Affairs, as well as our other testifiers, I'd like to change the current language to say that, to read that an individual security number, either in its entirety or the last 4 or more digits, and therefore broaden the scope of the coverage of the bill. And that's it. Members, any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, Vice Chair.
Now voting on SB 2292 SD1. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Noting the presence of all members, are there any members voting no? Any members voting with reservations? With all members voting aye, Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Final bill, Senate Bill 3038, Information Privacy and Security Council. Like, this is an admin bill. I'd like to move it forward as is. Questions, comments? If not, Vice Chair.
Now voting on SB 3038. Chair's recommendation is to pass as is. Noting the presence of all members, are there any members voting no? Any members voting with reservations? Saying none, with all other members voting aye. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Adjourned.